Hello, Brave Writer family. I'm so glad you come back each week to listen to this podcast. Your reviews, your stars, your subscriptions, and just your wonderful feedback help us keep this show on the air. So thank you for that. This week, Melissa is attending to a family matter, so she will not be able to join us. That said, I have a wonderful guest today named Crystal Haitsma, the parenting coach. Some of you may know her from Instagram, and we'll get to that interview in just a moment. First, though, I wanted to let you know that my next book is available for pre-order. I know, fourth book, kind of amazing. It's called Help, My Kid Hates Writing. And because I have 4 books now, I finally realized I think I need an author website. So we put one together, and that website is juliebogartwriter.com. So if you want to pre-order, I would love it if you did. There will be some pre-order bonuses that I'll announce, so hang on to your receipt. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your enthusiasm for the work and writing that I do. I do it for you. I do it for me. Let's do it together. So let's dive into this wonderful conversation. I'd like to introduce you to Crystal first. She's a certified life coach and a homeschooling mother of 4. Her work centers around helping people learn to trust themselves, to trust their path and their life. She loves to find connections between nature and adventure, whether she's traveling with her family or exploring the depths of the human spirit through her favorite books. She's passionate about guiding others to move beyond shame, and that's something that we talk about a lot in today's conversation. And she wants all of us to embrace a life that's true to who we are so that we get to experience the natural high of success and satisfaction that comes with it. Please join me today in welcoming Crystal to the podcast. Hi, Crystal. It's so nice to have you on the Brave Writer podcast.
I am so thrilled to be here. I love you. I love your podcast. I love your work. And so this is a treat for me.
I'm glad. I want to just say for those listening that Melissa is not with us today. She's dealing with a family event that is in her family's best interest that she attend right now. So we are podcasting without her, but I have great confidence in my ability to converse with Crystal, who I've been following on social media for a while now. And I'm very eager to talk to her. So Crystal, you're a life coach. And I wonder if you could simply start by telling us a little bit about your training and what kind of coach you are. You know, who are your big influences? What themes are important to you? Let's just set the stage before we dive into some, role modeling and figuring out how to help ourselves. Yeah.
Let's do it. I'll also mention, I also home educate. I've been doing that for maybe 13 years. It's been a long time. One of my kids is in college. This is his first year. And then I have 3 other kids at home. And my youngest is 8. She'll be 9 next week. So that's kind of my personal life, I guess. We love to travel. We live in Canada. We traveled around the whole world for the school year.
Nice.
Last year. So we came back from that and that was awesome. As far as life coaching goes, I did my degree in psychology, and I by the time I graduated, I was pregnant with my second. I was like 5 months pregnant with my second. So I stayed home. I was a stay-at-home mom. I started homeschooling. I didn't really do anything for myself at all. And it was actually homeschooling that got me into life coaching.
Oh gosh, I believe it.
I started realizing I was reading more about learning, right? I was kind of unlearning about learning. I used to set up their school as their homeschool as their actual school was set up. And we were just butting heads. It was like I was trying to bring public school at home, and it was awful. Anyways, over the years, it took a lot of years for me to figure out that is not how learning works best for them, and how does learning actually work best for them. And I'm reading all these books, and I'm reading books on, Dumbing Us Down and Phases of Learning by Oliver and Rachel DeMille, and Wild and Free. And as I'm kind of reading these things, I'm like, okay, no, wait, this can be done a different way. But one of the things I noted was that you model what you want to see, and you inspire your kids. And at that time, I remember thinking, what am I modeling as far as learning goes? I watch a lot of Netflix at night when I'm so burnt out and exhausted, and I don't really do a lot I don't do reading. I didn't read anymore. I didn't write. There were so many things that had gone by the wayside of parenting. And so I just started, I would read books that I enjoyed, which was like psychology books. That's what my degree was in. I brought out my psychology textbooks. I started reading Brene Brown because I always loved her. And I would write my own essays, like just for fun at night when the kids were sleeping.
I love that.
It really just started getting me back into the zone of like, I actually have a mind. I have opinions. I have things to say. I have things to think about. And so simultaneously kind of going on this parenting journey where I have these kids that are neurodiverse that I'm really struggling to parent, learning about secure attachment and parenting and changing things and shifting things. So over time, things are going really well in my home with myself and my relationships with my kids, which was not always the case. And I kind of fast forward to this time where I'm like, you know what, I think I actually want to go do something like for myself. And I'd been doing little bits of things. I decided to learn another language and I was taking watercolor classes on YouTube and I kind of was doing fun little things for myself, but I really wanted to do something more. So I wanted to do my master's. I wanted to become a therapist. And I think that life always turns out exactly how it's supposed to. And I ended up getting invited to this evening out on relationships, and we stumble in this conference. We're like halfway through. It's already halfway through. We're so late. We come in the back, and just listening to half of it, I was like, the way the lady was talking about relationships was totally different than any kind of therapy that I'd heard of before. And I went and asked her afterwards, I'm like, what is this? And she's like, I'm a life coach. And she started talking. It just seemed so much more proactive, and it seemed so much more
Yes.
powerful. Like I have the ability to take a tool and use it every day to change my life. And I was like, this is what I want. I didn't even know what a life coach was. I actually thought it was someone that like helped you like get out of bed and like, you know, write your schedule for the week and like apply for jobs and like just do life things. I had no idea that it's actually quite similar to therapy, but it's much more forward focused. It's much more productive or proactive. And so I fell in love with it. I trained through a program called the Life Coach School out of Texas, and immediately went into a training through Brene Brown Institute. It's called Dare to Lead. I took a Dare to Lead
Oh, I
certification.
love that book so much. Oh,
So I
fabulous book.
loved that book. So it's a training that you can take where you can learn all of that in more detail, and it was fabulous. And that's actually where I fell in love with shame,
Ah,
because I started to realize that the problems I'd been helping people through with coaching, because had started my practice by then, um, were all what I could see. The issue was always shame, like underneath relationship problems. Yes.
it's so fascinating that you brought up life coaching because my own daughter started as a life coach. That was her first job. And one of the things I learned from her is very much in alignment with what you said, that it's proactive, it's helping put people in touch with their goals and then helping them find a path forward to actually act on those goals. And it's not so much introspective in the like, why are you this way, as much as how can we remove those roadblocks that allow you to achieve the things that are your goals? And
Mm-hmm.
so, what I wanted to ask you is, what do you consider the chief impediment to that life practice? Like, why would I need a coach? What is that thing that gets in the way? I know you have like a core philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
so I want to hear about that.
Yeah. So my core philosophy would be that everything boils down to shame. Um,
Okay.
And which is interesting because Brene is kind of what got me into this in the beginning. Like reading all of her stuff, I was like, yes, I love this. But then when I started helping people, I would help them with relationships or with motherhood or with homeschooling or with business. And it seemed like what came up over and over and over again was shame under the surface in a way that we don't necessarily recognize. We don't all think like, oh, yeah, I have shame. But I started to see that that was blocking us from showing up in the way that we wanted. And so that's what I help people most with. And that's what I find the most fascinating because it seems to be so prevalent in kind of every arena of our life.
So, do you want to give us a definition? Because maybe the word
Mm-hmm.
shame calls up different images for various people. How do you
Mm-hmm.
define it, and what does that mean in your practice?
Yeah, I would say in parenting, people usually call it guilt. They're like, oh, mom guilt, or I have guilt,
Mhm.
guilt about how things are going or whatever. But from so far every client I've ever talked to, it's not actually guilt. So Brené's definition would be guilt is based behavior based. It's I did something wrong, and shame is I am wrong. I think of it as like not enoughness in some way. There's something about my identity, my core self, that is wrong. That's how I define shame.
And is that feeling of my core self being fundamentally wrong something that is common for everybody, or is that the result of trauma or a kind of
Mhm.
parenting? Like, how widespread is shame, and what would be the root cause of it in most people's lives?
Yeah, I think it's all the way widespread. I would guess. I don't ask myself like, do I have shame? I usually ask myself like, where is it? Where is there something that I'm not seeing right now?
Ah,
I do a lot of journaling every morning, and so I'll be like, okay, where is it coming up for me right now? And so in my opinion, it would be that it is everywhere. And I don't know so much if it comes from trauma or not. My favorite definition of trauma comes from Dr. Becky at Good Inside. And she says trauma isn't the specific event, it's an event held in aloneness.
oh, wow. That's
And
nice.
I thought that was beautiful because it's not that, our brains can interpret an event, even if it's not a hugely significant event as a child, as trauma when we felt not seen, when we felt not heard, when we felt not
Mm.
connected. And so that's probably why we all have it, because it's kind of part of the human condition. We're not always going to be seen and heard and connected to. But I think especially prevalent in our culture because our parenting used to be so much more shame based that maybe we deal with it more than we could. But yeah, that's kind of what I see.
When you were saying, parenting used to be more shame based, I think when I think of shame, I lived in North Africa for a number of years. And one of the differences in that culture versus like a Western culture is there's a collective use of shame to create the kinds of manners and practices that create social cohesion. So, whereas Americans are kind of oriented towards this independence and individuality, there's a feeling of the collective being really important. And you don't want to bring shame on your family. You don't want to bring shame on your
Mm,
community. You don't want to bring shame on your religious background. You're constantly thinking, how can I preserve and protect the people in my life and my community so that they show up in their best way? But what that does is it sometimes takes away your individuality. It makes you pretend, it makes you hide. When I think of shame in an individual way, it feels a little bit different to me. I started thinking about when I was a little kid and in the 1960s. And that's when parents still spanked. They sent you to
hmm
bed without dinner. They told you that you were bad. We
hmm
all pretty much agree that those are not good strategies for parenting. How does shame show up today in parenting? Because I'm sure parents
Mm.
still use it as a tool, but maybe it's disguised or looks different than it used to.
Totally. Because I remember even growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was very much like, be more like your sister or you should know better.
Oh,
I think there's some phrases there that we're pretty used to that are pretty shaming. And I think even, in my day and age, spanking was, I've worked with clients who still now are spanking. So I think that we haven't totally done away with that. And we're still pretty into timeouts. And if you think about timeouts, it's like it's separating your kid from what they want. They want you. They want to be present with you. They want to be attached to you. And you're separating them from that thing. And so I think even that isolation of like, no, you have done something wrong and now you don't deserve to be seen or heard or whatever. I think I think
oh,
that there still is shame in the way that we respond to our kids.
mm,
But I would say now it's a little bit more subtle in that we might not recognize it. We might be rushing out the door and we're all kind of late and I get frantic inside because I might be feeling like, oh, well, what if I'm late? What if my kids look sloppy at school? What if we're late for this activity and everybody looks at us strange, whatever. I might not be consciously thinking about this, but I'm just feeling this frantic energy and I
mm,
start rushing everybody. Why are you so slow? Why can't you put your shoes on faster? Why can't you, we start being more short with our tone. We start being more unkind, just a little bit more dismissive. And it's kind of those subtle ways where we might not recognize like that our shame's actually
yes.
coming through, but it still is.
I remember when I was raising my oldest son, he was 2 years old. I was in therapy at the time, and it was kind of new to talk about shame. I remember the drama of The Gifted Child by Alice Miller, and I remember reading John Bradshaw's books, which were really helpful. And so, anyway, she was explaining like not to use shame to motivate your child. And I remember leaving thinking, oh, good, done. And I got
Yeah,
home,
I'm gonna
and
use
within
that.
2 hours, I had already shamed him. And then I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to overcome this temptation to be like, I
Mhm.
can't believe you didn't put away your shoes after I asked you to, or,
Yes.
all those ways that you kind of, it's like there's a presumption of behavior that all adults have for their children. And when they don't live up to those expectations, our exasperation or our surprise act as a shaming tool. It's like we're saying about them, how dare you? Or I can't believe
Mhm.
this about you, instead of being curious about what's presenting. I asked you to put away your shoes. It didn't happen. I'm curious about why, not, wow, what a lousy thing that you didn't do the thing I expected you to do. I'm going to let you
Yeah.
feel the impact of my disappointment. Like
Mhm.
that's really that shaming behavior, isn't it? Letting them feel the
Totally.
impact of disappointing you.
Yeah, or like silent treatment. Like a lot of clients that I work with, even younger ones, like their parents gave them a lot of silent treatment if they felt like they weren't behaving properly or whatever. So I think that there's kind of a lot of ways we do it when we don't think that we do.
Mm,
And so that's why I don't ever ask myself the question like, "Oh, do I deal with shame anymore?" I just presume like, "Okay, I'm human, so I probably still have it there." And where is it showing up in my life right now? What arena
mm,
is it showing up in my life? And then I think back on those times, like when I was talking about that frantic energy I was feeling inside, if I'm trying to rush my kids out the door, when are all of those little times where I feel those twinges of kind of strong emotion? It can be frantic or rushed. It can be frustrated, irritated, angry, rage. Like what's underneath that?
mhm.
And for me, when I ask myself what's underneath that and I kind of dig down the layers, usually it is some amount of shame under the surface for me.
And so take that a step further. So shame about what? That you're not a
Mm,
good mother, that you're going to be late. And then what does that mean? Like, if I think
yeah.
about being annoyed that my kids don't get out the door when I need them to, I'm often, it feels very pragmatic to me. I'm like, well, I thought I
Hmm.
gave us plenty of time and now you're dawdling and you're going to make us late. And then I have to deal with the consequences of being late. And it feels like it shouldn't be my fault because I was trying to prepare us and now you're thwarting. Like,
Hmm.
how is shame involved in that?
Yeah, yeah. That's why it's a little bit harder to see because you don't necessarily see it on the surface. So it might show up. So the first layer is going to be kind of that blame and defensiveness. It's all going to seem like your kid's fault, I promise. It will be like, no, no, no. It is all them. If they just changed, everything would be fine. So I ask myself a series of layered questions. They're really simple questions like, why? Why does this bother me?
Hmm.
Like, okay, so if we are late, if we show up late, why does that bother me? Okay, well,
Mm,
what will other people think? What are they actually going to be thinking? And then I might write that down. I do this in journaling. Well, what about that is bothering me? And I've done this
mm,
before with my kids not listening. I ask them 17 times and they still don't do what I ask. And when I got to the root of that, at the top, it's the blamey stuff, like they just need to listen. And then I was like, well, good parents have good kids that listen. And if my kids aren't one of those good kids, what does that mean about me? Right. And the core of that was for sure, it has to be me. It has to be my parenting. It has to be maybe I'm not a good mom. In the late example, it could be something like, what will other people think about me? Like
mm,
maybe being on time is means something about myself, not just
mm,
a value that I hold, but like maybe it means something about me. And
mhm,
so I ask myself those kinds of questions. And my favorite question would be, what meaning am I attaching to
mm.
this?
That's a good one. Yeah, exactly. Because I can imagine, like in some cases, you're late to a park day, no big deal. But if you're
Hmm.
late to the dentist, right? Like to
Hmm.
reschedule that appointment sounds really dire. And
Hmm.
I'll tell a funny story, or sort of a vulnerable story. My son Noah wanted to learn to play the piano. He was like 11 or 12, and so we found a piano teacher, and we signed up with her, and she seemed like a really good teacher. But Noah and I both, to this day, do not manage schedules well at all. Until calendars had alarms on them, I routinely blew through deadlines and missed appointments just regularly. And so this is all before alarms on phones. And so what would happen is we would miss 2 or 3 piano lessons a month. So out of 4 lessons, we'd miss 2 or 3. That's at least 50% of them. And over time, and I was still paying for those lessons. So I was paying for lessons he wasn't even going to. And over time, that really starts to build up as a feeling of shame. Like, I'm just a loser. I can't manage my calendar. And it really came to a fever pitch when the piano teacher fired us. After a year, she said, I can't work with people who don't show. I can't keep taking your money. I know that you're willing to pay me, but it's wrong. You got to get your stuff together. And then that's when the lava flow of shame came over me, because I thought, wow, this teacher won't even take my money. That's how bad we are at this. And it's something my son have talked about since. So what do you do in a situation like that? How do you handle that? Not only the feeling of shame, but like what feels like an irreversible characteristic of your personality that creates these conditions. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, I was talking to Dr. Ann Kelly. She wrote this book, Secure Relating, and I had her on my podcast, and she said that so often we think about these things as personality trait flaws, right? Like, oh, I'm just disorganized. That's like a flaw that I have, versus like, this is how my brain works. Like, there's a very different way you can be thinking about these things. And I think we often think about them as flaws. Like, if I'm the kind of person that forgets appointments, then what's wrong with me, right?
Right.
And I too am that way, and luckily live in the era where I can set 15 alarms a day so that I don't forget my kids at their appointments, and I remember to go pick them back up again. And which has been helpful. I burn things a lot in the kitchen because I'm like, oh, I swear I'm just going to go check on this one thing, and then I, come back an hour later. So I feel you on that. And I think that one transition there is just like, is this actually a flaw? Is this a flaw of my personality? Because I don't think about Albert Einstein and think, well, it was totally a flaw that he would, forget his shoes, or he would have his shirt on backwards, or he would forget where he lives and people would have to direct him back to his house. I just thought, well, his head was so full of this beautiful stuff that we needed that it didn't need to care about those little things. So I think part of it is a transition of like, is this actually a flaw or not? So I kind of consciously poke holes in that. Like, wait a second, what is really happening here? But in that lava flow moment, that's a whole different thing. When you're really feeling it and you're like, what do I do with this awful feeling?
Yeah.
And I guess there's a way to deal with it, and it sounds kind of awful to begin with, but it's really that you have to sit in the feeling of it. And we are not used to actually feeling our feelings. We talk about emotions, we talk about them like we understand them, but we can understand them logically all we want, but sitting in a feeling is very different than logically understanding a feeling.
So is shame a feeling?
That's a really good question. In Brene Brown's book Atlas of the Heart, she has shame down there, and I think most research would say that shame is a feeling, but some of the training that I've done since then actually says that shame is a perception.
That's what I was going to say. It's an interpretation of a feeling, I think.
Yes, and that it's a perception based on other people. Like, if you were the only person on the earth, would you ever feel shame? Because it's how I view myself in regard to other people and people as a whole. And so I would say it's a flood of emotion. I don't know if it matters necessarily what we name it, because I think the feeling, again, it doesn't come from this logical part of like, why is it here and what is happening and how do I describe it? But it's, can I sit in the sensation that I'm feeling in my body right now? And can I drop out of that logical part of my brain and just be with my body in this feeling that feels like I want to rip it out and run away and not feel it? That it feels simple, but it's actually really difficult to do.
So what happens if you sit in the feeling? What good does that do? Why is that a good idea? How does that fix anything?
You're like, no, that sounds awful. No, so really, there's a couple things you do. So first, you're going to sit with the feeling of it. And if you have the capability of sitting with it for long enough, like several minutes, you'll notice that the deeper and deeper you get into that feeling, eventually the bottom kind of drops out. That sense of worthlessness kind of just washes away. It doesn't hold. It only holds because we're staying in our mind thinking about all of the other things that we're also doing wrong. Well, I also forgot this last week, and what if I forget this next week, and I'm never going to figure this out, right? But if we can drop out of our mind and into our body, it doesn't hold. We stay there for as long as we need to. But if I'm really struggling with the moving through it, I actually imagine that it's a child. I imagine like I have this child that's feeling that same way, and they just came to sit beside me on the couch. What do they need from me? Do they need me to be like, okay, I only have 90 seconds to feel you. Oh, I can only feel you at this much capacity today, right? They just want to be sat with. They don't even need me to say anything with them. So I actually envision this. I envision myself just sitting next to this child feeling this feeling. And I imagine that feeling within me. And I just sit there with myself. In exactly the same way that I would love to sit with my 8-year-old daughter when she's feeling that way. And not much has to be said or done. It's more of this process of relating to the feeling. And again, that bottom just will drop completely out, and you will be filled with a sense of compassion. And I love Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion. And my belief is that self-compassion is the antidote to shame. That's the outcome that we want.
Yes. Yeah, she's awesome. I haven't studied her, but I've heard her interviewed multiple times, and she gets referenced whenever these topics come up. Happy 25 years to Brave Writer. Did you know that in January of 2000, I launched my company with a writing class? That's right. I think we may be the very first online homeschool class ever in the homeschool business space. When we launched this writing class, we had to use an email list. I didn't even have a website yet. Here we are 25 years later, and what we've learned over those years is that the best writing instruction has a few key properties. First, it is limited to one goal over a short burst of time. In other words, we aren't just endlessly working on a project. We have 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks where we dedicate ourselves to one format or one concept in writing. Secondly, it's great if you've got a group of families, a group of students working together so that we can read each other's writing and learn from one another. Third, all the feedback from the instructor is public in that group. That means each student can learn from what another student is getting out of the class. The teacher feedback is widespread, and it normalizes comments from a reader. And finally, our classes are not interested in making sure that your kids are prepared for year-end testing or grades. Instead, our goal is to give your child the confidence and the competence to actually care about writing so that when they do year-end testing, they don't feel nervous about hitting a standard. They feel confident about expressing themselves. We've discovered, because we've been at it for so long, that our students leave our program feeling ready to be writers rather than ready to rely on tools like AI and ChatGPT. If you think teaching writing is a challenge, sign up for one of our classes with your kids. We seek to educate you, not just your child, so that the two of you can become an editing and writing team. I would love you to learn more. Go to bravewriter.com/online-classes or visit the link in our show notes. So let's take an example. I talk with a ton of parents, and one of the I tried to create like an archetype or a melange of the feelings that I hear when parents are struggling. And here's a good example of one. A mother comes to you. She says she's tried everything to make her homeschool successful, including trying to make it fun and magical. But her kids, who are 9 and 11, fight all the time. They resist everything she does for them. She's feeling not just discouraged, but defeated. And she's feeling like her intentions are right, but she's also failing to execute them on a regular basis. how do we help a mother like that? What is
Mhm.
the kind of direction you would give her? And I can feel at the root of some of these parents who've reached out to me is kind of a hurt feelings underneath it all. Like, I've taken all this time to really patiently think about the life I want to create for my children, and I'm taking them into account, and then they're just wholesale rejecting it. They're bickering.
Mhm.
What do we do for her?
It's interesting because, again, it seems like the kids,
Right,
right?
right.
It seems like, well, they just need to change and they just need to like this beautiful thing that I created for them and everything will be fine. That
Exactly.
that sounds like it, right? But at the root of it is actually a feeling of rejection of self. If I've
Mm.
put so much of myself into this thing, if I've poured my identity, my ideas, my opinions onto this and they're rejecting it, again, I would ask myself that question, like what meaning am I attaching to this about myself?
Mm.
Because if I'm attaching meaning to this external thing and I'm wanting my kids to fulfill that gaping hole within me, even if they did love it one day, the next day they probably aren't because they're kids. So it's
Right.
going to change every day. So I think that I would always encourage to start kind of with that end piece of energy, of that emotion, because that needs to shift first before we can get to like, what do we do next? And I also think our intuitive insights, our creative ideas that come, um, really seem blocked when we're feeling shame and self-doubt and confusion and worry and fear. And so I would start with the sitting with the emotion first,
Mm.
because as soon as you change that energy, everything else changes. You're going to feel so differently about it. And I felt exactly the same way in my home where I'm like, wait, I set this up like your school classroom. We have circle time and we have table centers and it's beautiful. And we got all these beautiful books and nobody's doing any of it. And then I, recognized I was doing it not the way that was actually for them. They weren't part of it. I wasn't asking them, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? What does your perfect day look like? So there's,
Yes.
there's the practical way to attack it like that. But I would suggest that the practical things will never work until you've shifted your energy first.
Well, and that brings me to something that you talk about on your Instagram page, this idea of non-attachment. It
Mm,
sounds like part of what you're urging for a parent is to be less attached to the outcome of that effort instead of,
mhm.
because kids can feel when they're responsible for your well-being by how they react to you. And some kids
Yes.
so deeply don't want that responsibility, they're going to make sure they never provide you with the reassurance you seek. So, can you talk a little bit about non
Yes.
attachment? Because I thought that was really a
Yeah.
beautiful concept.
Oh, it's one of my favorite principles. I learned about it through Buddhism. And the idea is as soon as we like give our power over to something, it has power over us. And so when we pour our identity into something, right, when we're seeking validation from something outside of ourselves, it's because there's this gaping hole within us. And I think they call it praetus, but praetus is the hungry ghost. So you can be born again once you've reached nirvana, or no, not no one. I think you're just born again. If you had over desire in your past life. So you're born again as a praetus, which is a hungry ghost, which is a being that goes around consuming and consuming and never feeling satiated.
Oh,
And so that is exactly what this feeling feels like. It's like, yeah, they might give me the validation that I want, but it actually won't feel like I think it should feel on the
mm,
inside
mm,
because it's something that only I can give myself. So non attachment is recognizing, where am I attaching part of me, myself, my enoughness, my value outside of myself in any way. And it can be parenting and homeschool, but it can be like a number on the weight scale. It can be a number in your bank account. It can be something your
mm.
friend texted to you, right? And those things we can be attached to because we're making it mean something about us, even if we don't consciously see that. So non attachment is the idea of separation, energetic separation. And when I separate myself from that thing, then it allows me to just be me and it allows my kids to also be them. And like you said, they immediately, like, kids are like energetic thermostats. Like
Yes.
they know everything. We don't even have to say. They'll know what we're feeling without us saying anything at pretty much all times.
So, one of the dynamics that I have run into with parents is this feeling of being sort of like they're drowning in their own inadequacy. So they don't know how to keep the house neat, and they need it to be neat to think straight. And of course, they've got home wreckers in their 5 kids. And so they're actually in this intractable dynamic where their kids cannot sustain the conditions that they need to feel at peace with themselves. How does a parent carve out the necessary time they need to kind of create that non-attachment that, in Al-Anon, we call it detaching in love, right? So it's this idea we still hold the other person in loving regard, but we no longer feel this deep responsibility for ensuring that they turn out. Now, that's much easier to do with a spouse or a full-grown adult, much harder to do with a 7-year-old. You feel responsible for their education. You don't want their childishness to rule the roost. On the flip side, when you push and push and push, they resist and resist and resist. So do you have like a practice that a parent could start their day with that will help them create the conditions for this non-attachment or this detachment in love, and a sort of like a shame barrier so that they don't fall into this relentless pattern? Because I feel like that's the thing parents are battling. It's this unnamed pattern that just sabotages their lives.
Yeah. So I would say that one of the things we like to do is we like to put other people's needs first, especially as moms, right? It's like, make sure everybody else is fed and then I'll sit and eat. Make sure that everything else is done and then I'll do the things I need to do. I'm not going to shower or get dressed until everybody else is ready and like settled. And
Wow.
so I think part of it is a shift of, I actually have to be highest on my priority list if I'm going to increase my capacity. That's the only way to increase my capacity. So as I increase my capacity to allow myself to go first, I will naturally feel more capacity for love, for connection, for relationship, for homeschooling, for all the areas of life that I want to. So I would say that first. And as I do that, I don't even let myself leave my room before I've done that. I don't even get dressed before I've done my thing. And so whatever your thing is, it needs to be a shift of energy. So it could be religious. Maybe you do a daily devotional. Maybe you pray. Maybe you meditate. I would definitely add at least a little meditation there, because we don't take time for stillness and pause. So even if it's like, I started 60 seconds, I was like, I cannot imagine meditating, but maybe I can do it for 60 seconds. And journaling in the way that I've been talking about, where you're like, okay, where is shame showing up for me? Or yesterday when we were running out the door and I was feeling frantic and rushed, like, what was happening here? Maybe I can dig in a little bit more to that. And as you take time just to journal and sit with your feelings, even for 15, 20 minutes every morning, it will actually change everything. Like just that short amount of time will increase your emotional capacity so much. And then all those other little shifts will happen over time.
I really love that. I know that journaling can be so powerful. I have journals all the way back to 4th grade. And one practice I've been doing this last year was started by Elizabeth Gilbert, writing a letter to yourself from love. That was a really, really powerful experience. I also have done some 12-step work where you're given specific kind of journaling prompts that you need to work through. So sometimes it helps if you can find Diana Hill, who we've interviewed on here. She does ACT therapy, and she's got these fantastic journals that you can work through, which is that self-compassion. All of those are also valuable if you're not a natural journaler. Like sometimes it's nice to have a prompt. you don't have to come up with it for yourself. The second thing that I really want to underscore that I think you said that's so valuable is taking time for yourself before the day starts. Just to remind those of you who listen, or if you haven't heard me say it in a while, I like to take 30 minutes in the morning and let the kids just play before we start homeschool. Like I don't wake up and eat breakfast and immediately go to the kitchen table with math. The first 30 minutes, I'm listening to a podcast. Back in the day, I'd listen to the radio. The kids would play with Lego or clay or puzzles out in the living room, under my supervision. But I was listening to something for an adult mind. It gave me something to think about all day. Because to be honest, thinking about which American Girl doll trousseau I needed to pull off the top shelf was not
Mhm.
sufficient for my adult mind. I needed mind food.
Mhm.
So there's the component of introspection, but then there's also the component of being a grown up and letting your grown up mind. I loved when you said that you got really interested again in psychology because partly you were homeschooling and your own mind awakened to learning.
Mhm.
That's all a part of my awesome adulting philosophy, that you grew up to be an adult so that you could do adult things, not just so you could recycle your childhood through your kids. So if you need
Mhm.
to study something right smack in the middle of the day when you have your best energy 1 day a week and you don't do homeschool during those hours, the other days will be far better because you did that investment. Like, don't be
Totally. And I don't
afraid.
think homeschooling takes as long as we think, especially if your kids
No.
are little. But even as they get older, I find that they're much more self-directed. So it still
Yes.
doesn't take as long because I'm not sitting there having to explain their lesson to them.
Yes.
So, and when they're younger, so much of it is through play, right?
Yes.
Like, they just need to play. They just need to be read to. They need to listen to music. They need to run around outside. And so I think there is, even though we're like, oh, we don't have time for it. I'm like, well, what, are you sure? Are you sure there isn't time there? Because I think that we could always add that time for ourselves. And I would just suggest to do that first. Like, if that is
Exactly.
the highest on our priority list. And I love what you said about mind food. I think it is combining that, like, am I stimulating my brain with like interesting things to think about? And then
Yes.
am I also integrating that? Am I writing? Am I thinking? Am I pondering? Am I, sitting in stillness, to really kind of consume what it is that I've listened to?
And the thing is, it will show up in your homeschool because as
Mhm.
you think, so is your homeschool. It's very hard to just do rote instruction. It's hard for your children and it's hard for you. I think a lot of women, I'll focus on women for a moment, but I think we've been trained to believe that if we're efficient, we'll be well fed and satisfied. But efficiency is not nourishing. It, it's
Mm.
it's housekeeping. Housekeeping doesn't nourish you. It's just
Yep.
something that we have to do. And some of us believe if we do it masterfully, we'll finally be at peace. But that's actually not
Yes.
true. One of the things that I learned how to do, and I learned how to do it well, actually, is to write, to do my career in the middle of chaos because
Mm.
chaos never went away. I had 5
Yep.
kids. My house right now, because I live alone, can stay perfect. It can look good all the time. And that is not satisfying. It's just
Mhm.
it's just a perfectly nice house. Over Christmas and when my mother was dying, my whole family came in. So many things broke during that time. I can't even tell you. Like furniture, picture frames, plates, all kinds of things got destroyed. Stains on blankets, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is reminding me when I was raising 5 children. My life was like this all the time. Good
Mhm.
thing I did not put my energy on keeping that from happening. Because if I had, I would have felt endlessly frustrated, right?
Yeah, just
There,
the other day I was doing a guided hypnosis and I thought it needs to be quiet in here. And I was like, no, it can't be. So
it
let's
can't
just
be.
try it. So I was literally in there meters away from my kids. All of them are doing their thing. And I still had the most beautiful experience. It was like 20
Amazing.
minutes. And I was like, you know what? We don't need it to always be still and quiet. And I think that idea of efficiency is interesting because I would say we tie our self-worth to productivity, to how
Yes,
clean our house is, to how much we get done as a mom, how good our kids are doing in their home education stuff, right? How good we have to meet with a facilitator twice a year. So it's like how good our interviews go. And if they say that we did a good job or if we're not doing enough, right? If we check off all those boxes, then we're like, well, then I can finally feel, like you said, satisfied. But we really don't because our brain's just like, our brain will always tell us that there could be more that we could be doing.
well, and the problem with things like efficiency around housekeeping or keeping your children on track is that you're literally doing things that are never finished. I remember one of my dear friends back when I was newly married and she had 3 kids, pregnant with her fourth. I didn't have any children yet. And I was reading this book that was all about homemaking, right? Like I'm a new wife and I'm going to eventually have kids. And I kind of wanted to really embrace this role. And she said to me, I'll never forget, she said, I do not want to end my life and be known for doing thousands of loads of laundry efficiently. And I was like, yes. And by the way, the woman who said that is the founder of Sunlight Curriculum. She's the one who came up with that while she was doing laundry, like thinking that big thought, imagining this whole system of sending out books, library books, to people in the State Department and missionaries all over the globe, so they would have access to what would be library materials instead of textbooks. So think about the difference between efficiency as, yay, I was known for successfully laundering my family's clothing versus big ideas that could actually have consequence. And honestly, if it means you get behind in the laundry to have the big idea, ultimately you'll feel better about yourself because of it. And it doesn't have to be that scale of idea, by the way, but just to give you an interesting contrast.
I'm always behind in the laundry. Just the other day, my 11-year-old was like, Mom, can you start doing the laundry faster? Like, we only ever do it when I tell you that I'm entirely out of clothing. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that'll change, hun, but thanks for letting me know.
Teach them how. That's what I did. Yes. I was like, oh, that's true. I don't want to be known for laundry. I'm going to teach my kids. So
I was like, you know what? I think this is a perfect time because I think he'll just go ahead and do it. But I think you're right. I think that we all are creators.
Yes.
I think that we all have something within us that wants to be let out, whether it's an idea or writing or, her curriculum idea. We all have something. And you're right. It doesn't have to be this huge, big thing, but we have something. And that is actually what will bring you satisfaction.
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, when you get in touch with that, non-attachment is so much easier. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because if you're over here and your brain is kind of like worrying on the thing that you're excited about, your child not being interested in the math lesson is a lot less important to you.
Yeah.
And your kids will pick that up. I remember when Johanna was in 7th grade, she was complaining a lot about math. And that was the time when Brave Writer was really starting to grow. And I just was tired of dealing with her resistance every day. And one morning I just said to her, you know what? I have a lot to do. I'm here to help with math, but I already studied math. I've got my degrees. I'm done. So, let me know. If you get interested again, I'll come back and help you, but let's just take a break till you're interested. Well, her temperament was the type that was like, oh my gosh, oh no. I can't let math go. I know I'm supposed to study it. And that little gap in me supervising it actually catalyzed her interest. Now, just to be clear, with my oldest son, when I took my hands off, he let go too. And we went on a
my boys did that too.
Yeah, we went on a completely different academic journey with him. He was not interested in coming back. That was not what he wanted. And I was just with him over the weekend. He's 37 now. So, the age of most of you listening. And he was laughing about it. He was like looking back and laughing about the fact that he doesn't have a high school diploma or a college diploma. He's done both, some high school, some college, never got degrees. Meanwhile, he has the highest paying job in the family as a computer programmer, right? So like all of us spending so much energy, right, on this very narrow world that we're trying to control for ourselves and our kids actually undermines the very goals that we think we have. Would you say that's true?
Totally. I remember my son, who's probably in grade 2, and we're trying to do typing and he's just hating typing. And I'm like, you got to figure this out. And we're trying to do writing. He's hating writing. This was back when I did it in a very public school way. And I remember him pausing one time and being like, you know what, when I'm old enough, Mom, we're just going to be able to like talk and everything's just going to like show up on the screen and I'm never going to have to write anything. So this is like, there's no meaning in this. And I was pondering on it later that night and I was like, he might be right. This was like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. Anyways, he was right? Dictation is everywhere now. AI is everywhere now. And he's so good at using it. He chat GPTs all the things. He talked to text. He did an entire essay. I mean, he is better at typing now, but he does a dictation on Word all of the time.
And of course.
he did this beautiful essay. And anyways, he's so good at it, but he was right. And I remember when you came on my podcast, you were talking about how the career that you have now wasn't even possible,
Yes,
right? You
didn't
wouldn't have even
exist.
known.
Yeah, right.
And I
We
think
don't know.
that's true for our kids too. Like we don't know what their path is, but one thing I believe is that the more we trust our kids and that they probably do know a little bit more about their path than we do, and
A
we follow
thousand
their
percent.
lead a little bit more, um, it will
And
go
the
so much better.
and you know what? They may not know either, but they
Hmm.
have their 20s. Like we tend to think that everything they should know should be in the bank by 18, but it's
Yeah.
not true. The 20s are massively formative. And even people
Hmm.
who think they know what they want to do at 18 and 19 often change in the middle of their 20s. And if you're a life coach, you definitely know that. You will meet people
All the
in their
time.
30s who are like, so I got my nursing degree, but really I wanted to be a sculptor, like,
My husband, like halfway through, was like, "Wait, I don't want to be a banker. I hate this." He quit. He went and did another career. Anyways, now he's in another career, and I think that's going to happen actually more in the future
yes,
than less. I think it's going to become way more acceptable and way more seen that people are like, I can entirely change careers. I don't have
that's
to just.
right.
And who knows exactly the one thing that they're going to be when they're 18? I knew I was interested in mental health at 18, and I knew it would be something to do with therapy ish. And I'm surprised actually that I've never changed my mind. I think it was because it didn't come from my logical mind. I think there was some sort of a insight, spiritual insight that kind of came and was like, this is for you. But I really do think that what we want to help them be is like malleable and flexible and also intuitive. Like, can they trust themselves and can they trust that there
Mhm.
is a path, even if they don't know what it is yet? That's what I trust in them. They don't have to know all the answers.
What an amazing thing to be able to say to a child who's resisting your homeschool plan. Like, let's say I'm just having this idea. Let's just play with it for a minute. You show up in the morning, you've had 4 days of kids bickering, not wanting to do the homeschool, and you show up in the kitchen, all the stuff's on the table, everybody's bickering, and you just look up and you say, you know what? This was my best guess. This is what I thought we should be doing today. Everybody's fighting. I actually don't know what's going to get you the education you need. I'm going to keep offering, but I need to hear from you. What do you want? What are you interested
Mhm.
in? We're going to do this together. Like naming what's happening in the room, naming the experience is one of the ways to get through it instead of just fighting it all the time or trying to corral it or trying to appease it. Here, I'll just throw you some candy and hope that you'll, stop complaining. It would be really
Mhm.
interesting to just like I call it dropping the rope. Just drop the rope. Don't fight it. Just say, wow, everybody's really bickering this morning. Math seems
Mhm.
to not be the thing. What's the thing
Yeah.
today?
And I think that collaboration approach is so helpful. And
Yeah.
I think, like, even beyond collaboration, that idea of trust, like, can I trust that maybe they actually do know? Like, when your son was like, I'm going to drop math, and then his career has worked out
Eh,
exactly like it needed to. Like, can we believe that for our kids instead of being like, no, no, no. We have to learn every single thing. You need to know your social studies, history, blah, blah, blah. When they're like, but I'm not interested in that. And
Well,
as you,
ironically, so I have 5 kids. Three
yeah.
of them have taken pre-calculus, and those three have never needed it. The two who didn't take it both needed it as adults. So they just went and learned it. And just think about that for a minute. Like we're all worried about preparation, and the three that believed in preparation put themselves through all of that hassle for what? To get into college or whatever. The two who didn't take it eventually went into IT and programming. And when they needed it, they just went and learned it independently on their own because it made sense for their careers. And they didn't like ruin their high school lives
Yes. And I
doing
also
it when
think
they didn't care about it.
I've seen moms do this where I've had mom friends that went back to school and they
Oh,
always did
yeah.
really poorly in school. They almost failed. They go back and they're taking anatomy and physiology and
Oh,
they're getting
yeah.
A's in everything. It's because they want to, they're interested in it. It's for them. They're choosing to.
And
And it's
their brains are
becoming.
older. Your brain
Yes.
is more mature. Believe me, learning pre-calc at 27, easier
Hmm.
than at 18 or 17.
Hmm.
Easier because you've been working in the field that requires those skills. If you go back to become a nurse at age 40, after you've given birth, my gosh, you know so much more about biology than a
Yes.
14-year-old, right?
Yes.
Like you've got interest, you've got experience, you've got life that helps back up those skills. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that we need to keep remembering is that we are not responsible to get it all done by 18. Leave
We
some,
don't have to have life be so regimented. Like you do this at 18 and then you move out and then you have to pick your one degree and then you have to not change it, right?
yeah.
I think that's just not how life works. Life is so much more flexible and fluid than that, which is beautiful, right? We don't want this boring, you know exactly how the steps of your life are going to work out. That sounds like it would be nice, but it would actually feel quite boring, I think.
Yeah. I agree. Crystal, this has been fantastic. Can you tell people how to find you and reach out to you if they want to use your services and follow you on Instagram? Sure. Yeah.
All the things. Yes. So on Instagram, I'm the.parenting.coach. Crystal Haitsma is my full name. And my website is coachcrystal.ca. I have a podcast. This is the last season of my podcast, which is exciting. You can listen to Julie's interview from last season, and I'm going to have her on again this season. It's called the Parenting Coach Podcast with Crystal. I'll have something new again in the future too, but wrapping up that kind of parenting coaching portion of it. And yeah, I love chatting. So I would love to hear your take on this when you listen in and you're asking questions, or if you have something that you're trying to kind of figure out, send me a DM and we can chat about it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. I feel like this is going to be really, really useful to so many parents. And we'll put all of that information in the show notes as well. Thanks, Crystal.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Brave Writer Podcast. I'm Julie Bogart, and Melissa Wiley is my co-host. This podcast is produced by Nova Media with support from team member Jeanette Hall. Thank you for listening and for leaving either a starred or written review on the podcast app of your choice. Anytime you do that, you bring a lot of joy to the team and you support our work. So thanks in advance.